Hello, low ego action heroes. This is Debbie Levitt from Delta CX, and it's time once again for another of our live podcasts. And today we're going to be talking about what the heck are machine learning and AI, because we hear these all the time. We say these all the time, and I'm not sure we know what the heck these are at all. So I decided to track down someone who actually knows and bring him on the show to talk about it. If you are joining live, of course, we both welcome questions through the LinkedIn chat, the YouTube chat. You can tweet at me with hashtag DeltaCX. Or who remembers the last way? No, that's it. For live podcasts, those are the three ways to ask a question. So please pick one or more. And let's bring in our guest, David Knickerbocker, live from the West Coast of America. Good morning. Tell us all about you.
Good morning. So my name is David Knickerbocker. I'm presently a data engineer, but I have a long history of working in software development, web development. Before this, I was a data operations guy, and now data engineering, and I work alongside a lot of data scientists. And so I get to kind of see data flow all throughout the entire process from the customer standpoint all the way to being used in these models and the predictions that they do. So I've just spent the last 20 years in various data jobs, and that's kind of what got me to this point. So
You're the data guy. And just in case people are listening audio only, I'm going to spell your name. David is spelled traditionally David. Knickerbocker is also, I guess, spelled traditionally, but we should spell that Knickerer, B like Bravo, Ocker. Everyone, go find this man. Are you a tweeter? Where can people find you other than I know you from LinkedIn?
I spend most of my time on LinkedIn. I do a couple projects on LinkedIn. One of them was 100 days of NLP, which stands for natural language processing. And you probably saw a whole bunch of those. I completed that a few months ago. Yeah, that was so much fun. And then now I'm working on a new project called 100 Days of Networks. And that doesn't mean like TCP IP or the internet. That just means everything is a network. Like, the food chain is a network, or me and you talking is a network right now, or the people in your podcast are a network. So, ML and natural language processing and data science and software engineering, all of these things go together. And so I like to use LinkedIn as kind of my platform to share what I'm learning and to try out brand new ideas that I have. I'm a pretty creative person, and I like to come up with I just come up with weird ideas that I've never seen in books and try them out and then share how they work. So
excellent. I've been enjoying being a spectator.
Yeah, I love the interaction.
Oh, and Oz says he saw you on LinkedIn earlier showing off your new jacket.
Yeah. Yeah, I gave a cool talk. I think it was like February, so it took quite a while to get the jacket. But it came in yesterday. I gave a talk on how you can use networks to describe production data flows, and you can actually troubleshoot problems in a couple of minutes rather than a couple of days. And so that's a massive, or a day or several hours. So minutes versus hours or days is a huge time savings. And so that was neat. People are pretty enthusiastic.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know Oz, he's Mr. Excel on fire. Take your machete to crap data, so hopefully you two know each other, and evidently you are also geographically local to each other. So let's start out, now that we're already a few minutes in, just for people who are unfamiliar with these terms, they see them thrown around, but what do they really mean? How would you define ML?
Yeah, so I actually Googled it yesterday because I spend more time using it than I do thinking about the definition of it, and I wanted to give a good definition that wasn't contrary to what the official definition was. And so the definition of ML that I saw that I really liked was that machine learning is a field of computer science that aims to teach computers how to learn and act without being explicitly programmed. And I really like that definition. Because in the old way of programming, 20 years ago, everything would be a bunch of logic statements. And so we would come up with these process diagrams to figure out, if this, then what, loop goes here, blah, 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 blah. And so the new way of working with machine learning is that rather than having to deal with all of the logic by yourself, you spend most of your time actually preparing the data for these algorithms. And these algorithms differ on how they get the job done and how they do their learning. But if you have the data set prepared in a way, they can pick out the patterns by themselves. And so you spend most of the time preparing the data, whereas in the old way of programming, you spent all of your time trying to figure out the logic itself and then writing code. And I'll give you a funny story about that in a few minutes. But
But
yeah,
it
that's
sounds like
essentially what.
ML. If I am I understanding this correctly, it sounds like ML is more about finding sets of data that train the programmer system to make decisions.
Yeah, training is definitely the most challenging part. And I've spent so many hours creating my own training data. Like, for the NLP projects I've worked on, I wrote one that would detect hostile Trump tweets. I wanted to figure out who he is complaining about for that day. And so to do that, I went through thousands of tweets, which was not super fun. But found the ones where he was complaining, and I labeled those as aggressive or non-aggressive. And once that was done, then the algorithms could do their work to figure out the rest, and it still works to this day because his speech is pretty basic, but the targets of his angst change periodically. But the way that he does it remains pretty much the same. So that classifier still works. But yeah, that's the point, is that training data does take some effort to either find, and if you can't find it, you have to make it yourself. And so I spend a lot of my time creating my own training data. So,
So it sounds
but
like
yeah,
the data has to be specifically chosen for the training, so that there has to be data with some sort of consistencies.
correct. It has to be related to the topic at hand. And so I spend most of my work, not for work, for my own personal projects. I enjoy natural language processing more than I enjoy other forms of ML, because there's so many problems that we can solve with language. We have a problem with hate speech in America. We have a problem with racism. We have a problem with sexism in the world. There's all these problems that NLP can go after, but data scientists often get thrown at, making the company money, or like this kind of topic isn't going to save, it's not going to make a fortune for a company unless you make a company that hunts racism or
Racists,
something.
right?
Yeah, so yeah, I kind of lost myself there.
That's okay. You said you had some good ML stories. Maybe jump into an ML story.
Yeah, and sure. That the funny thing, like back in 2003, I actually made a dating website. I was a web developer at the time, and I lived on a tiny island. And so I had gone to college in the US, and I went back to my tiny island afterwards, and I realized that they didn't have anything as far as dynamic websites there. They had no database-driven websites there in English whatsoever. And so I worked near military bases, and I realized that people were trying to sell cars by putting note cards on a tack board. And so I created the first classifieds for that island, and it was wildly successful from the first day. Like, it was just needed. And so I built an ad platform for that classifieds website, and that was enough to, do really well for the company. And then I thought, what's next? And it's a military island. There's a bunch of young guys. They want to date. And so I made a dating website, and I hard coded all of the logic for that, and I built these big forums, looking at all these different dating websites that existed back in 2003. And so I came up with, things like, do they smoke? Do they drink? What's their religious preferences? What's their, all the different things that we think about when we're thinking about dating someone. What kind of movies do you like, or whatever. And back then, I created an if statement that ended up being like 200 lines long. Just, like what is the primary thing that people are looking for, and what's the secondary? And so that's logic meets logic meets logic meets logic, and it just goes on forever. And so the way that we choose who to date is a very complicated type thing, and so in my entire career, that is the nastiest piece of logic that I've ever handwritten. and it was utterly unmaintainable. But it worked so well that two of my friends actually got married because of the website that I created back in 2003, and so it did work. But looking back, if I had that data set, I could probably simplify it just using a few a few dozen lines of code and some ML in the background. That whole several hundred line if statement could have been transformed into, or just done using some machine learning and simplified far. So I feel like the technology has finally gotten to the point where it's caught up to my ideas that I had a long time ago. And so now the ideas that I've had so long ago are much easier for me to do. And so that's why you see me on 100 days of NLP or 100 days of network. I can just code stuff at light speed because I have the tools to do it now. So it's like a paradigm shift in software development. And I don't really consider it anything more special than just this is the next evolution for software development.
So, how is
So
AI different or the same? Because it sounds like if ML is about training a system on a set of data, then, is AI the same or different?
so I came up with a separate definition for that as well. Um, and so AI in general is just an ability for software to seem to mimic cognitive abilities. So, like the ability to learn or the ability to problem solve.
Okay.
Machine learning is kind of the engine that allows AI to happen. And so, machine learning is how, for instance, software can learn that this is hate speech or that this is a positive review or something like that. My understanding of it is that ML plus some basic software development is how you get AI. Like there's still going to be some traditional software that goes on past the ML. ML is just kind of um, it's kind of the advanced pattern matching with the cluster finder. You know, it's kind of the brain towards it all. If that makes sense.
So, yeah, so it does. Thank you. So, in the past couple of days, you and I have thrown each other a couple of examples of e commerce websites gone wrong where they have made some really poor recommendations to people. You tagged me on one yesterday, it might have been, where somebody wanted to buy flowers for a partner and the flowers were out of stock. So, it recommended to him, what was it? Now I'm forgetting. It was
A
like
bell pepper.
a bell
Is
pepper.
it bell
Yeah, it
pepper?
was Whole Foods. It was the Whole Foods website. And it's like, we're out of flowers, but how about a bell pepper? And I
Yeah.
talked about how I bought a headlamp on Amazon and the rechargeable battery seemed to be dying. So I went on back to Amazon to get the rechargeable battery and I didn't end up buying it. I bought another headlamp. But then for like a month, Amazon kept feeding me e-cigarettes. And I had
Mhm.
to do a little digging to figure out how I ended up in e-cigarettes land because I've never smoked anything in my life, which makes me boring but reliable. And it turned out the battery that goes in the headlamp is the battery that goes in the e-cigarettes. Is this ML? Is this AI? Is this just data? Like, where did this go right or wrong when we see these mismatches?
Yeah, so I think that this is probably a combination of ML and network science. And so, like, if I like something, and if me and you like the same thing, we might also like another thing that, like, if you and I both like a certain band, and I like steaks, and we're friends, maybe you like steak also, and it kind of completes the triangle. It's a network thing. And so it is ML, but it's also networks. Um, the term AI is it's so vague that I think it's almost meaningless because, the dating website I made in 2003 is technically AI because it could make its judgment on who should date other people, who should date which people. And there's an AI researcher last year. We had a conversation about what is AI, and because I've always kind of hated that term, I just prefer to call machine learning, or call regression, or call software development. I really hate the idea of calling things AI just to sell things.
Right.
Um, but if you create software that mimics the way a human thinks, or if you create software that mimics an ant, that is AI. It's mimicking some other form of intelligence. So, but yeah, when it gets it wrong like that, to me, when you mentioned that it found a connection between vapors and the people with those lights, I thought that was really interesting because that's a cool insight, and I think that's part of the network. It realized that the flashlight users use this battery, but so do the vapors, and so that's how it connected that to that subject, I think.
Yeah, I want to ask you about another one, but we have a great question from Oz. I'm going to take a 10-second break to quickly plug my company and remind people to subscribe. Hold on.
Okay.
Delta CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation. And I hope everybody will please remember to hit the subscribe button wherever it is. I have no sense of this thing. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Won't you please usability test it and make sure it works? And please have deep empathy for the like button. Tell the YouTube algorithm that you like this. Tell the YouTube machine learning and artificial intelligence that this is a good video and something to be recommended to other humanoids like yourself. Thank you. Oh, and don't forget quickly, please sign up for the Acture prototyping workshop I'm doing in December. You will also get my Acture videos, and it's all for $60. Check it out at deltacx.link/DEC 2020 because that's when it's happening, December. Mark thy calendars. Oz has a great question, and I know Oz is always on fire and always concerned about ML and AI being used, let's just say, badly. And he asks, with natural language, how do you handle nuance, intent, irony, sarcasm, or someone quoting someone else? Going after hate speech is a great idea, but I worry that AI and ML are too crude.
Sarcasm is something that I've heard people having difficulty with, and I think somebody I met on LinkedIn last year was mentioning that they were creating models that could detect empathy,
Ooh,
and so yeah, which is another one. And so detecting hate speech or detecting cyberbullying is very easy because it picks up on these very hostile words directly, whereas something like sarcasm, even humans have trouble with. And so your models are going to detect with much lower accuracy because even humans can't detect uh, sarcasm in written form. When if we look at LinkedIn and somebody says something or writes something sarcastically and they don't put something like /sarcasm at the end of it, you won't catch it. Like
right.
we're just terrible at it. And so ML's or NLP is going to have the same issues. Um, and think plagiarizing is similar. You have to have text to compare against if you're going to build a classifier for plagiarism. So let's say that you had a website of a million academic submissions, you could use NLP to find submissions that were very, very, very similar using topic modeling, and that's actually something that I'm doing right now. I'm analyzing a network and using topics to find clusters. I want to see what the demographics are inside of a network. I realized that if you take the top 3 topics for each user, you can actually, if you personally, if your primary topics are 1, 3, and 9, you kind of have a fingerprint 1, 3, 9. And then whereas if I'm some sports fanatic who loves Bon Jovi, maybe I'm 99, 7, 3 or something like that. And when you look at these combinations, you see similarities emerge. And so I've even seen, I haven't written about this yet, I'm still experimenting with it, but I think I might have found a way to detect bots, which are hard to catch because bots get spun up with automation. But to go back to plagiarism, if articles are very, very similarly written or just outright plagiarized, they should have very similar content, I think. And so topic modeling should kind of pull those together.
And
Does that
Oz
make sense?
followed
The
up.
topic model.
Yeah, and Oz followed up. I put it up on the screen. You can probably see it on your end. He said, "No, hate speech isn't so easy. People have gotten in trouble for quoting someone else to denounce that person's hate speech." So he's talking more
Yeah,
about quoting than plagiarizing.
I see. Yeah, I have gotten hit by like Facebook's algorithms in the past where it's like, what, how, what, this is ML gone bad, like you were talking about. um it happens,
We have a
but
question about that, actually. And I think Lee's in the middle of typing because YouTube and LinkedIn cut off comments. So, Lee, I need the second half of your question. Lee is saying, putting one's disdain for Facebook to the side for a moment, which I never do, is it AI or ML that prompted Facebook to reject ads? So I think Lee had put up an ad. She runs a weight loss group in Facebook, and I think she had put up an ad, and we don't know the rest of her story. It says they rejected the ad because, but I guess she's wondering, and I don't know if you know this, is Facebook using ML or AI to reject ads, or is this all the mechanical Turk?
I'm not sure. I mean, they could be. I think you have to be careful when you use ML. If you're going to use ML to make automatic action, you need to be really confident in the results that you're getting, because it's not going to be 100%. Like if you know exactly what you're building with traditional software, you know what if statements go where. With ML, you have to hope that your model trained well and it's going to do its classification correctly. And it's possible that if Facebook has automated something and just left it to run wild, that it's banning ads that it shouldn't be banning, or blacklisting users that it shouldn't be blacklisting, or reporting posts that shouldn't be reporting, like if it catches hate speech wrong, you know. um, it's unfortunate, but uh, I don't know exactly what it is. I don't work for Facebook, so I can't really say what the problem is. But ML can be done wrong, and you have to be very careful when you do it. So I like to use ML for my own development much more as a suggestion tool. Like I've used it to find people that promote violence, and I've then manually reported them after verifying it with my eyes that they are advocating protesters be shot. Um, I wouldn't create a program that would automatically report people for hate speech or violent speech like that, because you can get them in legal problems, or you could probably even get yourself in legal trouble if you just let that thing run wild. So I don't know why her ad got blocked. I don't know the context behind it, but it's possible that ML at least flagged it and somebody would take a look at it, but it shouldn't just outright reject it. Like outright rejecting it seems like a human thing to do. Does that
Or
make
a
sense?
Facebook thing to do? Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I
I actually I actually deleted Facebook off my phone a couple weeks ago. I consider it data science gone bad, because it's it keeps you angry all the time. They use ML to suggest stuff that I mean, their ML is so good that it only suggests stuff that you're going to like. And so you only get the news that you want to read. You never really get the opposing viewpoints. And so um, it just reinforces things over and over and over, and you just get angrier and angrier and angrier. Or at least I did. And so I just threw it off my phone for good and deleted my account that I've had since 2007. And they just have their ML so well, but I feel like they're doing it wrong in some way. Maybe they'll get it again later, but
No, it'll get
right now
worse.
it's not good.
Yeah, I deleted Facebook almost 3 years ago. I still use Instagram because I like to tell my story in pictures, but I can't wait until there's a reasonable competitor and I can shift away from anything owned by Facebook. But that's for another topic. I
Mhm.
wanted to tell you about a few years ago, a famous company I won't name, a department store. They were testing something that someone had built. I don't know who built it. But the idea was you were going to put in your age, you were going to put in where you lived, you were going to put in your gender, and it was going to recommend products to you. And I put in that I was 45. I lived in Daly City, California, which is outside of San Francisco, and I was female. and it suggested what we call granny panties and robes. Like terry cloth robes. Evidently, I had significantly aged at 45. Do we know what this is? Is this when someone says, put in these parameters and variables and we're going to match you with something? Is this like bad ML, bad data, bad coding? Can we guess from hearing these stories?
That's just bad software development. And for something that simple, that sounds like just a few fields. You don't even need ML for that. That could just be done using a couple form fields and a couple if statements. So that's not much. It just sounds like terrible software development to me. So,
It felt pretty bad to me. I was like, how dare you?
yeah, you don't even need that much. Like the classifieds thing that I built in 2003 was much, much more complicated than that. Um, but like it sounds like they just took 5 fields and did a database lookup on, what other people that have these 5 fields are doing. So you don't need ML to do that. You don't need anything fancy to do that. You could just do it with SQL. Yep.
A friend of the show, Frederick, has a question, and I've got to admit right now, I don't get it. So we might have to ask Frederick a follow-up question, but luckily YouTube's only about 20 seconds delayed, so hopefully he'll be able to clear this up for us. From a design perspective, do you guys have any thoughts about this new design material and how it ought to be handled? And when I asked him what design material, he said ML and AI as a design material. I don't know if he means how in UX people are now saying, start sketching something and ML or AI will fill in the rest of the design. Frederick, do you mean something like that? Can you guess? If you can't guess it, can we use ML to make sense of Frederick's question? I'm so sorry, Frederick. I had to write that joke. I am sorry, Frederick. I don't totally get what you mean. I do know, let me ask you this while we wait for Frederick to follow up. I do know that in my industry, in the CX and UX world, we're seeing all this stuff that says like, oh, your job is going to go away because ML, you've heard this about everything, ML and AI are going to figure out how to design screens and design interfaces and create user experiences. Your job is going away. And we all think like, no, we're really creative problem solvers. So thing one, is my job going away? And thing two, can you train a network or a system to be a creative problem solver?
Yeah, and that's what I think. That was the big reason I wanted to get on this, because I've heard that same thing about automation since I was in college 20 years ago. And so now now they say ML or AI, as to when back then we just said automation. And ML is just automation. And it just makes coding easier, really, but you get the same results. Like consumers get the same results that they ever did. It's just we can do cooler stuff. So no, I don't think your jobs are going away. And I even see bullcrap like AI is going to replace the need for software developers. And that's ridiculous because
Front Page did a really good job of coding. Do you remember Front Page?
Yeah, I remember Front Page from my old web developer days. But the hardest part about software development is not writing code. The hardest part is actually getting the data right and getting the domain knowledge right. Like if somebody gave me a rough idea of something I needed to build, I could get it 90% there in probably a couple of days or a day. But getting it to 100%, it takes time. It takes weeks or months to get all the bugs worked out, to make sure that you've got every intricacy correct, that you understood the data properly. And so the idea, I don't even like the notion of auto ML that data science loves so much, because you see so many topics on LinkedIn about how data scientists need to know the math. And there's a lot of snobbery about, if you don't have the math background, you can't call yourself a data scientist and blah, blah, blah. But there's so much hope for this thing called auto ML, where you just feed it a data set and it tries out a whole bunch of different models and then picks the one with the highest accuracy. But that's lazy software development, and I think is going to lead to a whole bunch more problems, because there's domain knowledge. You have to understand the data and maybe they expect that people are going to have that domain knowledge and actually validate that the model works at the end of it and that the classifications work correctly. Um, but I just hear about AutoML as kind of a silver bullet, you know. And so there's even that whole talk: are software developers' jobs at risk, or are data scientists' jobs at risk? And somebody created a neural network that could write code. And I looked closely at that code. It's garbage. That code won't do anything. It will not do anything. And it looks like code, but it won't do a single thing. Um, and if it does a single thing, it will like print "Hello World" or whatever it does. Um,
You
but it
said
won't do
print.
anything. Yeah, it won't do anything of any value. Um, so I'm a big skeptic of even automation taking people's jobs. And so rather than the fear of losing your jobs, I think people should be thinking about how they can use AI or ML to actually enhance their jobs. And so 20 years ago, when I was into web development, I was interested in what I think you guys are, user experience. That has to do with usability testing and things like that, right? Do I
Yep.
understand that right? And so I went to a conference in 2005, World Wide Web 2005, and I went to go see Tim Berners-Lee speak, and he's kind of the father of the internet. Um, but while I was there, I was really fascinated with the UX presentations at the time, and so I saw monitors that could keep track of where your eye movements were and things like that to follow along with where you spent your time looking at the screen, how you could do things better. I was very passionate back then about building websites for that were accessible to the colorblind, or to make it so that menus were simple for people who had disabilities. And so I was very passionate about this subject in the early 2000s. But then I just kind of became more and more of an engineer and got lost. Um, but I think that you can use ML or slash AI to uh, create agents maybe that do some of the work that human testers do. Like if you could, for instance, create an AI that could simulate how a human would use a web page and train it off of 200 different web pages, throw out a brand new web page and see how it predicts how the eye movement is going to happen on that page. Then you don't have to bring in somebody to actually sit down and stare at a web page. And so you can there's always a fear component with a new technology, but I think that there also needs to be an optimism component with a new technology. You know, like how can we use this to make our lives better? How can we use it to augment our own jobs? Um, does that make sense? That
Yeah,
was
and that
kind of
was,
a
turns out that was kind of Frederick's question. Like, what can UX designers, UX researchers, UX testers, people in that UX universe, what can we or they, how can we incorporate machine learning or AI into the things we're doing? And it sounds like that's one of them, though, again, that model would only be as good as the data on which it was created. But do you see any other natural opportunities for UX and ML to be cuddly cousins?
I would have to think about it, but I think the point is UX people should try to collaborate with data scientists. I think that when you build a bridge between different groups, um, it's amazing the new thing that you figure out. And so for myself as a software developer, I don't consider myself a data scientist or an ML engineer. I personally am just an avid book reader. I feel terrible if I stop learning. Like I just am an infinitely curious type person. And so one of my favorite things to do is read subjects that have nothing to do with software engineering, but are still sciences. And so like I'm getting into network science, and I got into machine learning a couple of years ago. And I feel like when you explore these different areas, you find new ways of applying something that scientists in some other way off department figured out, and you can apply it to your own stuff. And so for instance, social network analysis is not a computer science discipline. It's been studied for a long time. Sentiment analysis is not a computer science thing. It's been studied for a long time as well. And people are fusing it into computer science in order to build these really cool websites that can predict what you like, or can do a follow-up if you give a negative review, or things like that. And so I think it's important to branch out, and for you guys as UX experts to talk to data scientists and see, just have coffee together, and see what kind of ideas you can have, because they're very creative people and you guys are very creative people, and collaboration's where it's at. So.
More than coffee. I mean, in the book I released last year, the book I published, I'm a musician. I think of release. That's like an album. In the book I published last year, I suggested that data scientists are in the UX department and are working closely with UX researchers and designers. And one of the models that I introduced, I call behavior triggers, where we're trying to model for typical problems that go wrong in websites, apps, and systems, and to catch them in the moment, and to then connect people with a live human customer support representative through chat, not a chatbot, and to catch people having problems in the moment rather than being reactive later on. I think we can be more proactive with my behavior triggers model, which is like episode 20 something. If you guys want to go back into the archives, look up, I have a podcast, 2 new models: empathy, knowledge, action, and behavior triggers. And I think I know I'm not explaining it fantastically, but I think my behavior triggers model would be totally an ML adventure, because you would have to train it on, for example, hey, this person's credit card just got declined twice. They clearly want to buy this. They really want to buy this. Don't let them leave the site. Let's connect them now with a live chat rep who can get that payment processed.
I like that. Do you feel that data scientists are not thrown at UX problems very often?
No, I interviewed a data scientist for my book, and she said, I asked her, I said, what's the worst way to use a data scientist? And she said, the worst way to use a data scientist is to say, this is what I think, find me the data that supports it. And so, thing one, never do that. In general, I feel like data scientists are very disconnected from UX. At some of the jobs I've worked at, the data scientist was more of like a data owner or manager, like someone you had to go to for a database pull of some sort. We need to find 100 customers who fit these models or whatever, so we can talk to them. Hey, data person, pull this thing. So I feel like, at least where I've worked, data scientists, I don't think have necessarily been put to great use. Or sometimes I hear about the data scientists at Facebook and I go, oh my God, like, I'm sorry, but I cannot feel good about that. Y'all are trying to model how to make people depressed and sitting at slot machines. So I would have to say, I think they're not connected enough right now. And so my behavior triggers model was one idea. And I think there's basically, in my book, I said, I think I want a data scientist to partner with me, someone who can build algorithms and models based on how our customers are behaving. And maybe it will help us find more opportunities on what we should build for them.
Yeah, I love that. And that sounds like ripe territory for cool innovation. I have a similar story. I work in operations, and servers crash, databases go down, people write a query that blows up the database. But I would find that during root cause analysis, operations people would give very simple and inefficient answers about why the database broke, or why the production server went down. And I felt that data science could actually be used to create self-healing production systems, or to give at least better answers to management. But data scientists do not get assigned to operations teams. Operations are just, we have to deal with the headaches. And so the reason why I even got into data science, I mean, I had the statistics background from a couple of degrees that I've done. And in my early web development days, I created database-driven websites in the early 2000s, and I wanted to see what my customers were shopping for. And so I built in search, and I had to do what they're calling data science now. I had to do it very, very rudimentary. Like we didn't have cool Python libraries back then. And so if I wanted to create a bar chart, I would just, have it print out the number of stars, like if 10 customers wanted it, then it was 10 stars. And if 3 customers wanted it, it was 3 stars. And so you got a bar chart like that. Um, but operations, I have always felt, even to this day, has been neglected by data science. And since we're not going to get any data scientists thrown to us, I have to become that data scientist. And so that's what got me to go buy my first books on data analysis. But I was hired to what we call uplift these like 15-year-old servers, very old servers. And an uplift means you put it on a brand new server and do the code changes so that it works. And I ran into a couple machine learning servers, and I could not understand how the code worked whatsoever. Like in traditional coding, you have if statements, that dictate how the code works. But I ran into a couple R scripts where it just seemed like it took the data and created output. And that's very confusing as a software engineer if you don't know what you're looking at, because it's like, how does this take the data and create the answer? It was really bugging me. And that's why I got into machine learning, was that so that I could actually do operations on these abandoned ancient data science servers that were thrown into production 15 years ago, and the PhDs walked away from the company. I had to become that guy. I had to figure out how to do it. And so I have to warn, though, machine learning is something that can become an obsession. It's so much fun that once you go down that rabbit hole, your book expenses are just going to skyrocket. You're going to find yourself reading way too much because there's just so much material. But at the same time, like, my favorite movies are science fiction. My favorite books were science fiction, but I never read science fiction anymore because I feel like I get to live science fiction. This stuff is beautiful to work with, and it's so much fun. Um, but yeah, I think that since operations isn't going to get data scientists, I have to become that guy. And for UX, you guys certainly have somebody who is, tech savvy with Python. Get a couple books on Python data analysis and a couple books on getting into machine learning, and see if you can be that bridge between data science and UX. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'll ask you about some book recommendations in a moment, but poor Brian asked this question so long ago, and you and I just got rolling, so let's not forget him. Brian asks, how would you use AI or ML to help product teams prioritize the largest, I can think that says largest, the largest problems to tackle next? So I guess like as a prioritization matrix or model, how would it know? How would it? Because now I'm going to guess here. You tell me how I'm doing, David. First, we would have to feed the system what our prioritization matrix and model looks like. We prioritize this over this. We prioritize this over this. Then it has to see the backlog of what we plan to build. But then we would still have to plug in qualities to that so it can match us with stuff. I mean, this just sounds like there's a company called Aha, and they have something called a scorecard. Brian, look up Aha scorecard. I think it's this. And also, may I plug my own Delta CX decision matrix as a lovely prioritization matrix that I recommend. How would we use ML for this, or is that the right thing?
So in software engineering, you should not use ML until you're sure of what you've built. And so you always want to build it manually first, at least for the proof of concept, just to show that it works in theory. And then try out ML, because then you have something to validate against, And so, finding what your top problems are. If you have like a help desk app or something like that, then you're recording issues as they come in. You can do a simple SQL query against the database to see what the most common type of problems are that you're having. And so that's not even ML. But at the same time, if you wanted to build this more intelligently, you could use something like NLP and topic modeling to kind of catch the use the description of the problem to have them kind of cluster together. Because then even if they're not worded exactly the same, or if you build it so that you're not using the same exact drop down menus and you're allowing your customers to have more freedom, you can use NLP to actually get things to kind of gravitate towards each other and pull them into separate topics and then prioritize them accordingly. And so, if it turns out that topic 7 is something that breaks your company, then make a note of topic 7 is the thing that really, really hurts, and build your code accordingly to prioritize that. So
neat. Thank you. That's
yeah.
an interesting idea. Brian, run with that. And if you're still here, let us know if you have any follow-up questions. Thanks for that, David. Frederick is back. Let's see.
Hit me up on LinkedIn if you guys ever have any questions like that too. Like it's hard to come up with an ideal solution in 30 seconds. So
you're doing great. You're doing great. Frederick says, an interesting question in regards to design plus AI ML. How could we help our users understand, get insight into the decision that the algorithm made and how to arrive there? Okay, I think what he's asking there is very often we are all using websites and systems that have algorithms or ML, and we all feel like, well, how the hell did it do that? Kind of like the example earlier with Amazon trying to recommend vaping to me. So how can I think many users, and you probably look at it and you go, oh, I can see what they must have trained this model on. That's what happened. But we look at it and we go, this is freaking garbage. Can you think of any way that we can help explain to users how things like this works and in a non-scary way?
Yeah. And actually, this is a very hot topic science right now for AI or explainable AI. And so there are a couple of libraries that people are using, like Lime, or there's one called ELI5, which stands for Explain It Like I'm 5, like explain it like I'm 5 years old, that takes these classifiers and it kind of watches how they do classification, and then it gives a little report on, this was deemed to be an aggressive post because the topic 7 score is above this threshold and the topic 1 score is below this threshold. And so I think it would be beautiful if, like, Amazon on its recommendation page would have just a little tiny link that would say how we got here. And if you clicked on that, that would give you the output in very human readable form, not the raw Lime or Eli5 output, but actually in human form that would say, we thought you might be into vaping because network analysis showed a connection between these two things.
Batteries.
Yeah. And so there is a push for this. And even some of my own NLP stuff, this is something that I've been trying to go down, because the books I have don't really go into this very much. And so, for instance, I use topic modeling a lot for like tweet classification, because tweets are much shorter than like a book. And so I found that using topic modeling, you can very effectively do classification against tweets versus other models like naive Bayes. It just doesn't seem to work as well. You just have to try things out. But I have found ways to interpret the models, and I've been writing about them. But as far as I know, I've never run across people that are doing it the same way I'm doing it. So I think that some of the stuff that I'm doing is kind of inventive. And that gives me a lot of doubt at the same time, because you have to prove that your thing works, but it seems like it works. But at the same time, you can't just be afraid to try things out. You have to be willing to just like it's part of the engineer's personality, is just breaking things and trying things out and seeing what happens if I change this, or if I throw this at that. And it might not be the right way to do things, but if it works, it works. The right thing to do things, with air quotes, I should say. So.
Yeah, I use a feed reader that's trying to train its own ML to understand like what articles are about, so it can try to recommend articles to people. And it kind of uses us all as the trainers, which is, good or bad. So it'll show me an article, and and I won't name it gave its ML a name, so and so thinks this is, do you think this is about What was the thing it showed me the other day? Do you think this is about parenting? Do you think this is about parenting? Yes or no? And I was like, oh, that's way off. And I hit no. And it said, robot name. It gave it a name. ML robot name thought was 92% sure this was about parenting.
Mhm.
And then I was like, well, I'm glad I'm not paying for the premium version. I tried out there when they released that robot. I paid for 1 month for the higher version to use the robot, and then I found out it really didn't do what I expected. So now we get into the whole expectation of stuff. I thought that that robot was going to learn things I liked and didn't like, so that it could keep. Now this is a very specific use case, but keep out of my world articles that I would find too upset for me to humanly deal with. For example, I do not want to read about animal abuse. I don't even want to see the headlines. Like, I lose sleep for a week, if not months, when someone has hurt an animal, and I read one of those headlines. I wanted that robot to understand, never show Debbie that headline. And they're like, oh no, that's not why we're building him. And I'm like, well then what's the point? What's the point?
Yeah.
Who cares if this article is about parenting or about whatever, if you're not then going to give me the opportunity to say, show me more articles about parenting, show me less articles about dog abuse.
Yeah.
There's no question here, but say something.
But yeah, I was just thinking there's a few different flavors or there's a few different problems that ML solves. And so, one of them is NLP, which is the stuff that I love. The natural language processing is definitely, it's a rich area, and there's so many different things that you can solve with it. And then the second is, like, non-data people they're familiar with Excel spreadsheets. At least you're giving it a data set of rows and columns, and everything is numeric and well organized, and there's models that are very good with that. And there's another problem, which is computer vision, which is being able to classify who's at your door, or facial recognition, or things like that, which have been in security for decades, but we have new ways of dealing with it. And so what you're describing is an NLP problem, where it said that, it's 92% certain that this is this. And I do have to say, though, that NLP is a very challenging area of machine learning. For what we were talking about with sarcasm, it's extremely challenging to pick up sarcasm or to pick up empathy. It's much easier to pick up, positive sentiment or negative sentiment, because we use certain words. But at the same time, if we write a nasty review on Amazon, we might use a sarcasm, and it is a positive, because we could say, I've never been thrilled with this utter garbage piece of crap, and there's just so many conflicting words in that sentence that could throw the algorithm off. And so if it says that it's 92% certain, but it's asking for human input, to me, that's ML done correctly, because you want it to give suggestions, but you also want to have a human interface for humans to do correction. And
Let's see. So this is it's my feed reader, and this is an article from a website called Clients from Hell, and it's usually funny but you're crying stories of terrible web design and creative clients. So this is a story. I now I haven't seen this before. I just opened this up. It's a story about a client who was a technophobe who believes the internet is trying to steal his personal information, and how he ends up sending the creative worker a photo he took instead of just writing him an email about what he wanted, and just being like super paranoid. And the ML says, is this article about law? So I'm going to say no, because it's a funny story about a paranoid technophobe. And it says, thanks, your feedback helps make robot name smarter. He was 69% confident this article was about law.
Yeah. And so ML deals in probabilities. Um, I mean, if you want to be ultra sure that your classification is right, you could give it thresholds. That it needs to be above 90% certain that this is this, and before it gives its classification. Likewise, if it's not a life or death situation, you can allow it to be the 50-50 default. So there are ways around it, but language is not typically life or death. It's trying to feed you an article that you might find interesting, and so it's going to have a lower quality threshold, lower probability that it's right, um, and just try to get it to you, because you're going to forget about that article in 15 minutes anyway, and so no
Already
harm
have.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah,
What
that's how that
article?
works. But I'm always jealous, when I see NLP apps like that actually do have a human feedback thing, because all of the NLP stuff that I'm doing is for my own personal projects, and so I am the feedback loop, and so I let my classifiers run. I've got my own AWS stack set up, for my own personal use. Um, and every now and then I go back to my classifications and I relabel the ones that I got wrong and retrain the model so that it gets them right the next time. But I wish that I could just have, 1,000 people saying that they got this tweet wrong. This isn't hate speech, or this is not a violent speech, or, you know,
Oh, good luck with
kind of
that.
thing.
That'll keep you busy for a
Yeah.
while. Oz has a
Yeah.
follow up question. He says, when you get into language and sentiment analysis, I get triggered because it's so easy to break. And he says, quote, where is that old bag? End quote. Am I talking about a favorite bag or my grumpy neighbor?
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously there's words that mean lots of things. And something in
Yeah.
that article made Robot think it was about law. I guess maybe the word privacy. And Brian
Yeah.
says he'll come back later. Brian, we answered your question. Roll it back. So maybe help Oz a little bit before we have to sign off because we're almost out of time. What can you do in ML or AI to help it understand, I guess, more of the context?
So context, that really topic modeling, uh, which is just something you do as part of the NLP workflow. Topic modeling does very well with picking up context. Um, it just kind of, I feel like it's explaining gravity. Like similar words gravitate towards each other, is the simple way that I could explain it. Um, but at the same time, it's very hard to get even close to 100% accuracy on sentiments, because like you had there, old bag could mean two different things,
Right.
and so there's always going to be misses. Like if I can get 90% accuracy on a sentiment model, I'm pretty happy, even knowing that 10% is going to be off. That
And you were around
90%
that
saves me.
for your 100 days of NLP. I think you ended up around 90 or 92.
It really depends what I was doing. Like I built a spam classifier just to build one, and I know that the spam problem has really been solved. We don't really get much spam email anymore. You'll notice that, like, if you're using Gmail, you get no spam. It just goes to the spam bucket because they've got billions of emails, trillions of emails to train off of, you know. So that problem's solved, but I built one anyway. And, that one predicted with even using just like 4,000 rows of data as training data, it could still predict at about 95% certainty. Um, and it's an imbalanced data set. And so, if a newbie tells you that their model predicts at 99% accuracy, but it's an imbalanced data set where 90% of the data is one class and 1% is the other class, of course it's going to be 99% accuracy. But if it can get both classes with high accuracy, that's what your model should be doing. And this model could do that, and it could hit 95%, something like that, with even so little data. But for sentiment classifiers, if I can hit 90 or above, then that's outstanding for me, because I like to build things simple. I don't like to use neural networks. I don't like things to be too black box. I like to be able to actually dig into how my model's working and what it's doing, because then I can understand it and I can make corrections. Maybe I can spot things that are wrong with the data. So
Oh yeah, and I was
Anyway,
just gonna say, Oz follows that up, and I agree with him too. And you spoke about this earlier. Oz is saying, I bring this up not to be difficult, but if I'm in the 10% that's falsely flagged and get into trouble, or like Lee, get her ads taken down, who makes me whole? I don't want to be in trouble in here. Oops, but we got it 90% right. And I think that brings in what David said earlier about you still need some humans to check in on this stuff, especially where there's a decision to be made. It's one thing if the bot wants to guess if the article is about law or parenting. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got their account suspended. Nobody got money taken out of their bank account. But obviously where we're trying to get computers to make some of those decisions, it sounds like we need to bring more humans back into that process.
I think that this stuff should not be allowed to run wild until you're absolutely confident that there's no more problems, And so
Which is
if
like
you're
never.
part of that 10%, and if you're, yeah, exactly. And so if you're part of that 10%, that 10% is way too high. That 10% needs to be 1% or 0.1% in order for it to be something that can be left alone. Because 0.1%, that many angry customers is a lot easier to deal with than if 10% of your angry customers are calling your company, not to mention the reputation hit that your company is going to have if it makes 10% of your customers angry. That's a pretty nasty sentiment to have with such a huge amount of people, So who's going to make you whole? I mean, that depends on the company. I'm a data operations or a data engineer guy. I'm not a customer facing person. Probably not the nicest guy for customers to be dealing with just because I'm an engineer type person. But I think that just shouldn't be allowed to run wild like that. I think that if it is allowed to run wild and you're facing problems like that, then you should be pretty aggressive with management at that company, and just let them know what's going on and show them this podcast and my thoughts on that, I guess.
Yeah, our podcast is a weapon. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wind down. Thank you so much for giving us some of your morning today and talking about ML and AI. I know it's imperfect and I know that it's difficult in there. Oh, yes. We had some books to recommend. This says Super Intelligence. Who was that by? Hold that up again so I can say it to people who can't see. Nick Bostrom.
To get through the BS on AI, this was the first book that kind of made sense to me.
Super Intelligence. Machine
Learning.
Tiny
book.
By Ethan. What's the author's name? I can't see it. Ethan. Oh my God, I can't pronounce that. Ethem like Mary. Last name ALP like Peter. AY. Is that DIN or OIN?
Yeah, DIN.
DIN.
So
that's the eye test.
These are like weekend. Yeah, these are weekend reads. These are very simple books. Well, this one's not. This book, I never finished it. It's pretty mind-bending.
Well, then there you go, everybody. Add it to your reading list. David, thank you again. And everyone go follow him on LinkedIn. He does really post some interesting things about some things he's playing with. And I enjoyed it all this year watching your 100 Days of NLP. I was on the edge of my seat with what you were finding from those tweets and how you were making the model better every day. And of course, obviously, where this model would end up affecting somebody's life or job or account or bank account to bring the humans back in. Any last words?
Nope. Thanks a lot. This was my first podcast, so I really appreciate it.
You did it. Thank you again. I'll see you around LinkedIn. And for all of you low ego action heroes in the Delta CX universe, don't forget to subscribe and press like. And I hope we'll see you next week. Next week is UX Research Week with guests Michelle Ronson and Joel Barr. So tune in next week. See you live then. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.